Welcome back to the Frank Roche Show. Thanks for joining me as always. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, tell your friends, like the video, click the bell for notifications. I love the support. Thank you. Just going to check on a bunch of headlines today. We see President Biden calling illegals crossing the border Hispanic voters. Oh no, Joe. He accidentally told the truth. In an interview with Spanish radio, talking about the border crisis, President Biden said this: "It's even a bigger influx now in terms of Hispanic voters or Hispanic citizens who want to become citizens." Yeah, that's right. You heard it. Hispanic voters. So what are the Democrats assuming about all these people that the president's let flood across our southern border? That they're going to vote Democrat. Moreover, he's pushing all kinds of policies across the nation to give ID to illegal immigrants, to allow them to get jobs. And this is the first pathway to getting access to voter ballots, to voter registration. And so it's quite clear that this flood of illegal immigration that the president is allowing is for political purposes. Now we tie that in to new evidence as a result of FOIA requests about President Biden's Executive Order 14019, signed in the first months of his presidency. And this executive order mandates that every single federal agency register and mobilize voters with the express intent of increasing election participation among minority groups that tend to vote disproportionately Democrat. In pursuit of its aims, the order calls on agencies to solicit and facilitate approved nonpartisan third-party organizations to provide voter registration services on agency premises. They don't have the Zuck bucks that they had in 2020. Remember, Mark Zuckerberg flooded local election offices across the country with hundreds of millions of dollars to help register voters. And so clearly going to ramp up the federal system and the money associated with it to register voters. Never been done before. And again, notice this is an executive order that the Republicans in Congress could block easily with a vote or a lawsuit, but they've chosen not to. So the efforts to stave off global warming and climate change continue, of course, pushed pretty much daily. Something that happened last week with respect to activities on the sun and the aurora borealis visible well south of where they normally are, states as far south as the Carolinas. We're able to see the aurora borealis as a result of explosions on the sun last week. Coronas, I believe they're called, massive coronas. And then you realize how big the sun is. 1 million Earths could fit inside the sun. That's pretty amazing. When we think about the forces that impact climate and weather and temperatures on the surface of our planet, you got to think about that big old giant sun, of which we have no control. Think about how big the sun is. The Earth is pretty vast. Yet again, we can fit 1 million Earths into the sun. And so the vastness of the sun mocks those that seem to think they can control the temperatures on Earth. The sun is not going to stand down to any individual, any collection of individuals, any policy measure passed through Congress or any other global body. We're not going to be able to impact the sun, and the sun's going to impact us as it wishes. And there's something for you to consider when it comes to fighting global warming. Another death of something American last week. The Boy Scouts, all gone. Boy Scouts of America, an organization that molded millions of boys into leaders who valued nature, personal responsibility, hard work. It's now going to become Scouting America. And it's doing so to be more inclusive, to boost membership, to fill the coffers. And that's a little bit disappointing from a boy's perspective, a man's perspective, a male's perspective. And so a little disheartening to see the Boy Scouts go away. Boys need to be with boys. We should have Girl Scouts for sure. Sisters and cousins who were in the Girl Scouts and loved it. Great for them. Outstanding. We should have Boy Scouts as well. I love the story I caught over the weekend of a homeowner in California, Seaside, California, has kept a boat in his driveway. Decent sized boat. There's a city ordinance that says that large vehicles parked in driveways must be hidden from view. And apparently had this boat in the driveway for some time. And these local ordinances are nuisances for sure to lots of people. But from an aesthetic point of view, from a visual point of view, I don't have too much problem with this. But after such a long time keeping it there, and then finally to say something, obviously some neighbors complained or something. It's both. It seems in good condition, so it's not unsightly. But I get those kind of things. But I love what this guy did. ATN Constable. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. ATN Constable. He says, I'm not a rule breaker, but I make a political statement as necessary, as well as a humorous statement. So he put a fence up on his driveway to block the boat. He felt that the effort by the town was, and the city was stupid and ridiculous. And he didn't want to lash out at the city. He didn't want to do something, stupid or aggressive. And so he builds a screen, a fence on his driveway, across the driveway. And he hires a couple of artists to paint a photorealistic image of the ship, of the boat, on the fence. And it's fantastic. And it just looks fantastic. The artist did a wonderful job. And a big middle finger to the city. He's complied with the rules. There's no denying that. And so let's see how they respond. Donald Trump is actually making the most out of his now 4th week in New York City. Remember now, he's not on the campaign trail. President Biden has a campaign trail all to himself, although he's not making much use of it because, he can't. Former President Trump is using every opportunity he can to get free media, and he's getting a lot of it, billions of dollars worth of free media. Engaged with the media every day as he walks into court and leaves court. He holds impromptu rallies on the streets of Manhattan. And they had a really huge rally over the weekend in New Jersey, in Wildwood, on the ocean. Something like 80 to 100,000 people turned out. And he went off on President Biden, pretty severely calling him a total moron. Says the whole world is laughing at President Biden. He says you could take the 10 worst presidents in the history of our country and add them up, and they haven't done the damage to our country that this total moron has done, says Trump on Biden. He says he's a fool. He's not a smart man. He never was. Not surprisingly, went out to blame President Biden for his legal troubles. You don't do that to your opponents. It's done in third world countries, which is true. And we've never seen anything like this in American political history. And you can be sure everything that President Trump is being charged with, most elected officials, including presidents, have done in the past. Just weren't called out on it, weren't charged, weren't followed up on. Anyway, big rally for Trump, 100,000 people. And he had with him the guy that appears to be the lead figure for the VP candidate, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. He has executive experience. I like his policies. Seems like an impressive looking man, monetarily successful, which is important to Trump. And so I would love to see that Trump Burgum as the ticket. Not a huge fan of Trump, but again, lesser of two evils. We'll all make that choice. Victor Davis Hanson has done another wonderful interview talking about the threat of annihilation and connecting that to past civilizations who thought that they would never go away. And it's about his book called The End of Everything, How Wars Descend into Annihilation. And he's did an interview about the book with the Daily Signal podcast. And he talks about the Romans and the Greeks and the Armenians and the Turks and the Iranians, Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great, Aristotle, Scipio. Talks about all the great societies of the past that are no longer here. Talks about the history of China, Constantinople. And so he gets down to the fact that ultimately what happens is powerful countries, powerful forces, powerful rulers get into this denial phase where they think the worst can never happen. That North Korea will never attack South Korea, that China will never attack Taiwan, that Iran will never attack Israel, that Turkey will never attack Greece or Armenia, that Russia will never attack Germany or France or the UK. And so he thinks that denial exists here, especially with respect to China and our military strategy at the moment, emphasizing the need to recognize that China is our strategic foe and we have to act accordingly. And we don't seem to be acting that way, in his opinion. And he talks about all the things that China and Russia are doing together with Iran to ultimately usurp the United States, to usurp the Western order, and what we can learn from the past to protect us here today. and unfortunately doesn't make a very positive case for it. And it says that if we continue as we are, if Joe Biden is reelected, the first term will be nothing compared to what will happen in the second term in terms of changing what America is, changing what America has been. And of course, putting us at risk of being annihilated out of hubris and arrogance and denial of the true enemies we have out there. Victor David Hanson, whenever I see his name, an article from him, an interview, read it, watch it. Really an impressive guy. So I want to say thank you to President Obama today and Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. Hospitals now turning to pay in advance in full before treatment. Typically, you go to emergency room, where most people go when they don't have insurance. You get treated, and then you pay for the service afterward. You have to go to the hospital, you get treated, you pay for the services afterward. Well, as costs of medical care rises, the cost of insurance rises, as inflation is tapping out America, as more and more illegal immigrants access the healthcare system, hospitals can't pay their bills. Remember now, lots of hospitals are turned to for-profit hospitals. And hospitals are sick and tired of chasing people down for their money. Oh, poor things. And so this is kind of like the concept they have here is kind of like the copay you pay to go visit a doctor. There's no skin in the game for most people. Illegal immigrants walk into the emergency room, walk into hospitals, they get treatment, and they walk out, they never pay. And so non-payment by a relatively small number of people puts those that do pay on the front lines, pay up front. Remember, Obamacare promised increased access, lower costs, and higher quality in terms of health care, access to medical care, in terms of insurance costs. It was a lie then, and it's been proven wrong by now, 14 years later. Every Republican that's ever run for office since 2010 has vowed to dismantle Obamacare, and they've all chickened out when they had the opportunity to. The cost of health insurance and medical care continues to spike. Regulatory capture is deeply inset, and I feel bad for anyone who gets sick today. So I saw a poll out as we approach the 2024 elections, how Americans feel about different federal agencies. It was conducted by the Pew Research Center. About 10,700 adults participated in the poll. Number one agency in terms of popularity, the National Park Service. 81% approve of the National Park Service and the work they do. I think that's pretty understandable. We have some amazing parks, spectacular landscapes, and I'm happy that we cordon off that land to keep it for that. Of course, we have to be careful not to do too much of that. There's efforts by Democrats to try to make more national parks to reduce access to minerals and commodities and things we can get out of the earth to help us live better lives here on the surface of the earth. Surprised by number two, U.S. Postal Service, 77% favorable rating. Third, NASA, 74%, not bad. NASA's been kind of quiet for a long time now, been usurped by the private launch companies. Again, these private launch companies are just piggybacking off of NASA, using that talent to build up private firms and profits. The Social Security Administration came in fourth with 61% approval. CDC next at 56%. Veteran Affairs, 56%. FBI, 52%. Department of Transportation, 52%. Department of Justice, 49%. Only 49% of Americans have a favorable view of the Department of Justice. CIA, 46%. Department of Education, 45%. Ouch. 45% of Americans have a favorable opinion of the Department of Education. Federal Reserve, 43%. That could be some ignorance there. And the IRS last on this list at 42%. Let's think of Congress as an agency. What do you think Congress would rank? I think Congress would rank well below the IRS. No question. Other news that got my attention, again, back to the climate change and global warming issues. The efforts by humans to finesse the temperature of the planet to the degree of 1.5 or 2 degrees. The hubris and arrogance of that is shocking. What I do find is going to complicate any efforts we make here. Again, we can't do this unilaterally. But Asia is all over coal as its primary source of energy. Vietnam, China, India, building huge numbers of coal-burning plants. The regional core resurgence can be attributed to the rapid economic growth of these countries. China remains the world's largest coal consumer. In 2023, China accounted to 95% of the construction of the world's new coal power plants, with a total of 1,142 operating in China. India, another major player in the Asian energy market, also saw an increase in coal imports and production. In Indonesia, 254 coal-fired power plants, with 40 under construction. Japan, a big consumer of coal. And so whatever we're doing here is going to be offset there. And the misallocation of capital is going to be just unrelenting. It's going to be brutal as we continue to push under this idea that we only have this limited number of years to act, otherwise it'll be too late and the human race will be gone forever. It's just not going to be the case. It's going to be wrong. We had the Riksbank out of Sweden commenting about the risks of moving away from cash. If you're not aware of it, there's a global move to eliminate cash. Central banks around the world are moving towards digital currencies. And there's nothing worse for us as individuals, freedom lovers, than eliminating cash. Cash is king and always should be. Europe, led by Sweden, has moved a long way down the road of not using cash. One of the problems with not using cash, of course, is somewhat inflationary, because all these payment systems, these mobile payment systems, all have fees associated with them. So not only is not using cash giving up your freedom and your anonymity, not using cash costs more. Anyway, studies are beginning to show that there are real risks to not having cash, especially at this period of heightened geopolitical tensions. The key thing about the non-cash world, the digital cash world, is electricity and the internet. Without electricity and the internet, the digital cash world is over in seconds. And there's increasing concerns on the part of Western nations when they think of Russia and China and Iran of the risk of them being able to switch everything off in terms of electricity and the internet. And we'd be severely vulnerable. People would be vulnerable, elderly. And so it's becoming, thankfully, a national security concern. They're not talking freedom and anonymity, but they are talking national security. And so the Riksbank, again, the oldest central bank in the world, has issued a directive to its credit institutions to make sure they continue providing customers with cash services. Apparently, less than 8% of transactions in Sweden are done with cash. But the Swedish central bank has become alarmed by the threats to a society, to a nation, to an economy, as a result of digital payments relying on 24-hour a day, 365 a year internet and electricity connections. As we move to more vulnerable electricity creation as a result of the move towards renewable energy sources, this becomes even a bigger issue. It's a really interesting note there from the Swedish Riksbank. I saw an article the other day that makes me feel good, my comeuppance. Embracing communist China was Washington's greatest strategic failure. And then my friends and family, colleagues, fellow students, anyone who's known me since the early 1980s, indication of my age, will tell you that I've been warning anyone who will listen that our embrace of China when it comes to trade policy was a huge mistake and that we would pay a severe price for that. And more people now, 50 years later, are coming to that realization that our belief that we would democratize China, that China would be a complete free market economy as a result of having access to wealth and credit and the things that the Western world had, would eliminate the Communist Party and China would be the friend of the world. And that, of course, has turned on hubris and has proven to be completely wrong. Something I've been telling anyone who would listen for decades. It was U.S. business interests, economic gain, that pushed cooperation with Beijing, with China, since the 1970s. And now we know that that whole thing has failed. President Bill Clinton in the late 1990s, before he signed into law permanent normal trade relations with China, claimed the same thing. China's going to be a free, democratic society that will be our friend. It will not be a threat to the region or the world. Absolutely, completely wrong. I see McDonald's is feeling the pinch, as are all fast food restaurants. $18 Big Mac meals aren't proving to be very popular with customers around the country. Remember now, this is motivated by inflationary pressures instituted by President Biden, by the Federal Reserve, by Russia, Ukraine, by COVID lockdowns, by corporate greed. And so the images that McDonald's is seeing on the social media sites and the drop in sales when they show $18 Big Mac meals is really freaking them out. McDonald's is going to come out with a $5 meal deal. It won't be their whole menu. It's going to be just a couple of menu items, I think. I think McDoubles and the McChicken sandwich will be part of this $5 meal deal. McDonald's is no longer for the lower middle class or poor. It's for the upper middle class and wealthy to pay for horrible food. The appeal of fast food restaurants was cheap and fast. 3.5 years of Bidenomics and bad Fed policy since 2008 has really messed up the model. So we're going to have $5 combo meals, again, involving the McChicken and the McDouble, fries and a drink for $5. How much you want to bet they shrink those? I'm a McDonald's guy my whole life. I'm almost done. It's not that good to pay those kind of prices. I was watching some videos on YouTube and I came across James Carville. He got his fame by helping Bill Clinton get elected in 1992. The Raging Cajun, I think he is, Louisiana guy, says that Trump's more ahead than he's ever been and is urging Democrats to try something new because whatever we're doing is not working. Trump's more ahead than he's ever been. He laments how fewer Americans than ever are concerned about what happened on January 6th. He says it's going the wrong way. It's not working. Everything we're throwing is spaghetti at the wall and none of it's sticking, me included, referring to his efforts to sway voters are failing as well. Got to try something different, says Carville. He talks about his efforts to get Americans off of Trump and onto Biden. And he says you can prepare and be on TV and you can write pieces. You have a YouTube channel and nothing works. No one's listening. The Raging Cajun. Oh, and sad news in the auto world. The demise of the big three continues. Since the 1970s, the big three have been on defensive and have fought a decent fight, I guess, but they continue to fail. We have another indication of that failure now. GM, Chevrolet, the long-running Malibu. It's going away again. They took it away for a short time in the early 2000s, then brought it back. By one of the longest running and most successful vehicles in the history of the auto sector here in the U.S. is going to be discontinued again. And they're doing it to make electric vehicles. 10 million units sold across 9 generations. Not bad. That long-standing nameplate. It's going to be sad to see that go. And again, why? It's going to make electric vehicles. More expensive, harder to maintain, won't last as long. And then lastly, just mentioning real quickly, Russia is learning. Russia is learning from its mistakes of the past 2.5 years when it comes to fighting Ukraine. They have more men. They're producing more ammunition. And they're beginning to really put it to Ukraine, especially in the Kharkiv region. So Russia is looking to get everything from Kharkiv down to Kherson along the Dnipro River, all on their own. Southeastern Ukraine is going to be Russia's. I've told you since February of 2022, Russia's going to win this war. The best thing that Ukraine can do, the best thing the United States and NATO can do right now is facilitate some sort of defensive line to help entice Russia into negotiations for a peaceful solution to this. There's no other way. Russia is winning right now. Ukraine doesn't have the men or the materiel. And increasingly, Western nations are less interested in supporting them. And I told you all this in February, March of 2022. It's sad to see the millions of people that are displaced, the hundreds of thousands that are being killed and injured, the complete destruction of Ukrainian infrastructure and cities, wiped off the map. Russia's a brutal enemy. And they're getting it together in a way that many Western analysts said they would not, but they are. I said they would.